Right now, Kyrgyzstan has struck Moscow, the beginning of a real hunt for Russians. The Kremlin is in panic. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Armed Forces are rewriting military history. A naval drone did what was impossible. The footage will shock you. The victory parade is on the verge of collapse. The front is ablaze, and Moscow is cutting off communication and preparing for strikes on Red Square. All of this and more in our broadcast hotspot. Shock! A sudden strike on Russia in the center of Bishkek. In Kyrgyzstan, a hunt for Russians has begun. A sensational arrest with a one-day difference. Coincidence or a signal to Moscow? The special services are acting tough, and Moscow is bewildered. Who is next on the list, and what message is Bishkek trying to send to Putin? Watch.
The Kyrgyzstan Special Services have detained Natalia Severina, an employee of the Russian House. She is suspected of recruiting, financing, and training mercenaries for the war in Ukraine.
How often do we think about how to behave when detained by officials? Where is the fine line between respecting human rights, abuse of authority, and torture? Let's figure it out together.
A certain Viktor Vasilyev, who calls himself a political scientist, but is actually a GRU officer, was detained on the same charges. He also attempted to carry out sabotage in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion.
We can only hope for the prudence of the Kyrgyz Republic, which has been and remains an ally of Russia for a long time. Participation in a military political alliance with Russia through the CSTO, cooperation with Russia, can serve as a guarantor of security and stable further development of the Kyrgyz Republic.
The main recruitment method was luring people by offering Russian citizenship. This applied to everyone, and primarily, of course, to those migrants who came to work.
And of course, in Russia, they are outraged that their so-called allies are imprisoning the so-called veterans of the special military operation.
Well, actually, the courts of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan are issuing rulings against people who participated in the special military operation. They are being imprisoned for very long terms, like 8 to 10 years as mercenaries, yes. And they make no allowances for the fact that in our country, participants of the special military operation are considered heroes.
Putin is weakening. And at the same time, we understand that in Kyrgyzstan, not only Russia has influence. Yes, then perhaps yet China and Turkey have no less, yet if not more, influence. And in fact, today the authorities can quite possibly listen to China and Turkey much more attentively than to Russia.
Even the fact that Putin spent several days in Kyrgyzstan a year ago didn't help. He promised gas, asked for military cooperation, and awarded the president for his merits.
I am very glad to be in Kyrgyzstan.
Relations between Russia and Kyrgyzstan are heating up after a raid by Russian security forces in a bathhouse where Kyrgyz people were relaxing. The so-called law enforcement officers mocked the detainees. They beat them with batons and stun guns, forced them to crawl on their knees.
Have you seen the attitude towards Kyrgyz people in Russia? Ordinary drivers, cooks were in the bathhouse. The security forces came, beat them without reason, forced them to eat hot peppers, made them crawl. Why? Because they said, "We don't like you." They are mocking them. What was the reaction?
I would say that a convenient pretext emerged, which became quite loud and to which the official authorities could not fail to respond. Since the story in the bathhouse really gained traction and became quite well known among the general public, they had to respond to it somehow.
This is not the first situation involving the humiliation of Kyrgyz people in Russia. On federal channels, they were never considered as people.
Then within the Kazakh SSR, they created the Kyrgyz ASSR, and later they took it out and separated it from the RSFSR. That is, decisions about the formation of nations were made so arbitrarily. For example, Uzbeks never existed before the revolution. There was no such ethnic name. They took and created it from several Central Asian peoples.
Among ordinary Russians, they are considered second class. For instance, a passenger hits a Kyrgyz taxi driver because he prohibited drinking alcohol in the car. The police refused to initiate a criminal case. Representatives of the Russian elite did not remain silent about the situation either. Deputies Kabanov and Nostanina, in the best chauvinistic traditions, decided to put the Kyrgyz in their place.
Doesn't it seem that it's long overdue to put the overly arrogant and completely insolent Kyrgyz side in their place? The majority of Russian citizens are confident and waiting for Russia to finally remind the forgetful Kyrgyz comrades, who the superpower is here.
I will speak not as an official, but as a citizen of Russia. All of this reeks of black ingratitude and betrayal. I hope the initiators of the arrests of people associated with the Russian house will bitterly regret their step, as will all those who underestimated Russia and thought they could do anything.
Well, Russia doesn't currently have the means to, so to speak, strangle Kyrgyzstan, allowing them to behave so freely and directly threaten the country. As we understand, from the perspective of labor resources, Russia is heavily dependent on labor migrants today, primarily because a lot of people are indeed involved in the war. And naturally, these people who are taken out of the economy for the war need to be replaced by someone.
No matter how much you shout about your greatness, sooner or later you have to admit that because of the war it started, Russia is heading towards ruin. And those whom the Russians have oppressed for decades are now raising their heads higher. A defeat in the sky. The Ukrainian naval drone Magura has rewritten history. What the GUR operatives did, no one has done before. The Russian army has never faced such disgrace before. The armed forces of Ukraine delivered a humiliating blow to the very heart of the Kremlin's greatness. A legendary operation that the whole world is already talking about. All the details are coming up.
No one had done this before them. For the first time in history, Ukraine shot down a military aircraft with a naval drone. Our GUR confirmed the destruction and published this video as proof.
This, by the way, is not the first instance of the destruction of Russian aviation. But before this, it was helicopters.
A day later, some details began to emerge. In particular, the head of the GUR, Kirilo Budanov, clarified in an interview with The Warzone that 3 unmanned Magura V-7 boats participated in the attack, 2 of which fired at the planes. In the process, 2 Russian Su-30SM attack aircraft were destroyed. One of the crews perished, while the other managed to eject. The Russians immediately sent a civilian vessel for him, hoping that Ukraine would not violate the rules of war and fire upon civilians.
Despite the fact that the Ukrainians had numerous opportunities to destroy this civilian cargo ship along with the Russian military crew, they did not take advantage of it. They saw how the crew was being evacuated. They circled around the crew, who were struggling in the water. Nevertheless, they did not fire a single shot at either the cargo ship or the crew.
Also, it seems that the situation has become clearer regarding which missiles the Ukrainian Magurs were firing. In particular, a photo of a sea drone equipped with an American AM-9 air-to-air missile appeared online. Previous versions of the Bayraktar were armed with Soviet IR-73 missiles.
What is its uniqueness? What is its uniqueness? Well, indeed, it's in the fact that its surface remote control system, specifically remote, which is very important, managed to shoot down a manned object. And if we talk about the cost of the Magur, which is around 250 NAS to $300,000, and the cost of the Russian Su-30, which is $40 to $50 million, you can calculate how many times cheaper it means destroyed an expensive one.
Meanwhile, analysts are divided. The issue here is not even about the money, although the Kremlin repeatedly faces problems with it as well. The main issue is the technologies and production capacities, which in Russia are either lost or in huge deficit due to Western sanctions.
Each Su-30SM aircraft is worth its weight in gold. It's about the components. They are difficult to procure bypassing the sanctions. Moreover, as far as I know, Su-30SMs are either not being produced at all or are barely being produced.
Besides the obvious result of destroying Russian aircraft, this attack also brought another advantage to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The enemy is not completely subdued, but they are definitely in a state of terror. Having lost 2 colleagues, and apparently hearing about 2 more who unexpectedly ended up in the Black Sea, one can only imagine the mood with which they will now embark on missions, die, in the Black Sea area.
The crews of Russian aircraft flying over the Black Sea area now understand that they no longer have the assurance of safety. Even if they don't see our weapons, they see their targeting radars, which doesn't mean that these weapons aren't there. And these weapons, these samples of armaments, have precisely targeted their aircraft.
It's not easier, by the way, for the pilot's command either. because even if the radars detect Ukrainian Maygurs, it will no longer be followed by an unequivocal command to launch the aircraft. Since the leadership of the Russian Air Forces now understands, it's far from certain that the next pilots will manage to come out unscathed.
Every time the Ukrainians launch an operation in the Black Sea, it presents Russia with a difficult choice of what to lose. Oil and gas platforms, or let's say, some other rigs in the Black Sea. Or for instance, their assets in Crimea. Because these unmanned boats can also be accompanied by drones. In other words, they are like mini aircraft carriers. Or perhaps they might have to lose another helicopter or a Su-30 SM.
Read more about resonant events on the Times of Ukraine Telegram channel. Only fresh news and verified information. Link in the description below the video. We told you about the unique operation involving the downing of a Russian military plane, but that's not all. Hellish battles, hundreds of powerful explosions. That's how the situation on the front can be described. The Ukrainian Armed Forces steamrolled over the Russians, and the victory parade has turned into a parade of paranoia. In Moscow, an emergency. On May 9th, communication and internet are being shut down. Will the Ukrainian Armed Forces strike Red Square on May 9th? We are telling you right now.
An unprecedented incident occurred in the Black Sea waters. For the first time in the history of world wars, a naval drone destroyed not one, but two enemy fighters at once. These were Russian Su-30s that were attempting to counter Ukrainian naval drones. However, instead of being the hunters, they became the prey. This strike marked a real breakthrough in the field of asymmetric warfare. Previously, unmanned platforms had only managed to shoot down helicopters. Specifically, the Ukrainian forces had already accounted for 2 Mi-8s destroyed in similar operations. But for the first time, a naval drone targeted combat aviation. According to available data, one of the enemy Su-30s was shot down near the port of Novorossiysk, where operatives from the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine were operating in close coordination with the SBU and the defense forces. The fighter jet was hit by a missile launched from the Magura naval unmanned platform. These drones have repeatedly inflicted significant losses on the Russian fleet. The Russians could not hide the scale of the failure. Mentions of luring began to appear in pro-Russian Telegram channels. This is how they describe the Ukrainian tactic, where drones approach the target, provoking aviation to take off. At that moment, precise strikes were delivered on the aircraft. In fact, Ukrainian sea drones have become not only a means of attack, but also a trap. This case once again emphasizes that the Russian army, despite all claims of full control over the maritime space, has lost the initiative even at its own bases. Ukrainian drones are no longer just breaking through to coastal infrastructure, they are effectively destroying aerial targets, changing the rules of the game at sea. The Russian authorities once again demonstrate that even Victory Day can be held in bunker mode and electronic warfare. On May 9th, the Kremlin announced a ceremonial military parade in Moscow. However, the preparations for it resembled an evacuation more than a celebration. The festive initiative turned out to be so attractive and safe that all the foreign guests who were planned to be invited suddenly fell ill en masse. Not a single leader from friendly countries dared to take the risk, even for the red carpet at the Kremlin walls. Meanwhile, the military equipment that was supposed to be showcased at the parade was hastily covered with camouflage nets. The problem was that there weren't enough nets, and some equipment had to be literally covered with patches. The most indicative step is the decision to activate electronic warfare systems in the city for the entire day of the parade. Because of this, an official warning was issued in Moscow: there will be no mobile connection. The formal explanation is as follows: due to the holding of festive events. Exactly how the internet interferes with the celebration is not specified. The culmination was the speech by Press Secretary Peskov saying that President Putin will not be able to personally attend the parade this year due to a busy schedule, so he will join via video link. It is obvious that a busy schedule is a synonym for the word fear. After all, a parade where even the Supreme Commander-in-Chief does not dare to appear in person looks more like a target than a celebration. And the real reason seems obvious: fear of drones, which have already flown deep into Russian territory more than once. And now even Russia's main propaganda show, the Victory Parade, is turning into a parade of paranoia. Meanwhile, the operators of the strike drones from the Phoenix unit reported another successful week of operations on the front line. In the past 7 days, the fighters managed to destroy a significant amount of Russian equipment and personnel, inflicting substantial losses on the enemy. In particular, during the execution of combat missions, they destroyed Tor M2 anti-aircraft missile systems, 2 M-STAR-S self-propelled artillery units, 3 tanks, 30mm guns, 17 military trucks, and 3 passenger cars used by the occupiers. These targets were hit using FPV drones, guided drops, and other means that the Phoenix units effectively utilize in the combat zone. Thus, in just 1 week, the enemy lost equipment comparable in armament to several companies. The striking work of Phoenix once again proves air control and precise targeting are the key to destroying enemy resources without direct confrontation. Airborne operations at their peak. Results of the 3rd Battalion for April. The soldiers of the 3rd Airborne Assault Battalion of the 79th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade continue to destroy the enemy daily, demonstrating skill and coordinated work while carrying out combat missions in the Donetsk region. In April 2025, the unit inflicted significant losses on the occupiers by carrying out precise and effective airstrikes, primarily using strike UAVs. Every destroyed tank, truck, or bunker is not just a technical target, but a reduction in the combat capabilities of the Russian army. Currently, the battalion is performing extremely challenging tasks in defending the settlement of Constantinople in the Donetsk region. This direction remains one of the hottest on the front line, and it is there that the paratroopers consistently demonstrate their endurance, determination, and professionalism. While the enemy attempts to advance, Ukrainian paratroopers continue to methodically drive them out of fortifications, destroying enemy resources and holding the defensive line. The Pokrovsky direction is the hottest section of the front amid constant massive assaults. Up to 100 attacks occur here daily. The Russians are strengthening logistics and engineering cover. In particular, near the village of Kalivka on the E50 highway, the enemy is building tunnels, from nets to protect equipment from FPV drones. These engineering structures allow for the supply of offensive groups in the direction of Selidov and Novohrodivka, key strongholds of the offensive. This indicates long-term preparation to maintain pressure in this direction. The enemy is trying to stabilize the rear and reduce the vulnerability of logistical routes. In the Kupiansk direction, preparations for a new offensive are underway. Russia is preparing for a summer escalation precisely here. The likely goal is to reach the Oskil River on the R79 highway, which opens a direct path to Kupiansk. However, the situation remains difficult for the enemy. The Ukrainian Armed Forces destroyed pontoons with artillery and drones, which halted the mass transfer of equipment. Fighting continues in the groves and open fields. The advancement is minimal. The enemy has started using fishing nets, which form corridors for equipment. They are less explosive for FPV drones compared to regular chain-link fencing. Russia is trying to find a solution for anti-drone defense ahead of a possible summer offensive. However, the Ukrainian Armed Forces are successfully disrupting enemy logistics at crossings and supply routes. The strategic picture is as follows. There is an anticipation of summer escalation in both directions, in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. Active preparations for the offensive are being recorded, including massive attacks, engineering structures, and protection of logistical chains. Analysts predict that in the summer of 2025, Russia might attempt to execute a large-scale breakthrough. However, the actions of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the destruction of pontoons, drone strikes, and coordinated defense are already slowing down Russian plans. Russia continues its attempts to advance in the east, but is forced to improvise with logistics, engineering solutions, and even tactics for drone defense. Ukraine is successfully adapting, disrupting the pace of the offensive even at the approaches. A major offensive attempt is expected in the summer, but the Ukrainian defense remains resilient and is systematically preparing for a new wave of hostilities.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Urgent. Even Putin's friends are fleeing the parade. No one wants to be seen at the occupier show. Kremlin guests are calling in sick en masse. Even loyal allies are looking for any excuse not to fly to Moscow on May 9th. The parade is turning into a farce from which even the most devoted are running away. Even their own no longer trust the Kremlin. So what can be expected from the victory parade this year and who might attend it? Watch in the report.
Moscow is buried in snow. Forest fires are raging in Russian regions. But the preparation for Putin's parade does not stop for a single day. A list of prohibited items will be in effect at the May 9th parade in Moscow. It contains 26 items, including eggs and vapes. May 9th is approaching. The temperature is rising higher and higher, so Putin's friends are suddenly falling ill.
I think that those who are planning to come to Russia have much more courage than those who hide behind someone else's back and try to threaten anyone.
Taking sick leave is the easiest option when you can't publicly say no to the Russian dictator, but you understand that you need to avoid global condemnation.
I would also be glad to see you in Moscow for the May 9th celebrations. We are eagerly awaiting him in Russia for the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War in World War II. Mr. Xi Jinping has been invited to participate in the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War on May 9th.
Despite Putin's efforts, the self-preservation instinct has already kicked in for 3 leaders right before the celebratory parade. The president of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, suddenly felt unwell during his trip to the USA and returned to Serbia, canceling all scheduled meetings. Dr. Dincic from the Military Medical Academy stated that the cause of Vucic's discomfort was a sudden increase in blood pressure.
For many years, I have been involved in monitoring the health of the president of Serbia. In the last 10 years, he has had similar issues 3 times, against the backdrop of high blood pressure. While in America, he experienced chest pain, which was intense but brief. He received additional therapy, which was quite intensive.
Another European leader, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, also reported sudden health problems. Amid worsening health, Fico has cancelled his work schedule several times at the last minute in recent days. The alleged reasons are serious health problems that arose after last year's assassination attempt on Fico. But is that really the case? Currently in Slovakia and Serbia, despite the leaders' ailments, they confirm their intention to visit Putin in Moscow, despite threats from Brussels.
On the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War in World War II, we will celebrate this anniversary together.
Ukraine does not guarantee safety on May 9th, but these two have sworn to come to Putin to pay their respects. They are worried about the dispersals, which he is not.
Now they are worried that their parade is in question. And they are right to be worried. But they should be concerned that this war continues. They should end the war.
Even the Minister of Defense of India decided not to go to Moscow for the May 9th parade after Prime Minister Narendra Modi cancelled his visit to Russia. Now India will be represented at the parade by Deputy Minister of Defense Sanjay Seth.
For all of us, this is the biggest holiday, a sacred day. We honor the memory of 27 million who perished. Among them are grandfathers and great-grandfathers and those who live in Ukraine today. Therefore, this decision should unite and remind us that we are one people.
Recently, Lukashenko thanked Putin for the invitation to the parade in Moscow and confirmed that he cannot not attend. Then his press service announced that he will definitely be there, but he might be late. For the 3rd year in a row, Lukashenko leaves Putin immediately after the parade, not waiting for lunch. At the moment, the Kremlin has confirmed a 4-day visit by Xi Jinping to Moscow. Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Ukraine is not going to provide security guarantees for visitors at the parade.
We cannot be held responsible for what happens on the territory of the Russian Federation. They provide you with security, and therefore we will not give you any guarantees, because we do not know what Russia will do on these days. It can take various, let's say, actions on its side. Arson, explosions, and so on. And then blame us.
Kremlin spokesperson Peskov condemns Ukraine and its president for seeing the 3-day truce as a theatrical performance organized before the parade.
This is a test of Ukraine's readiness for peace. And we, of course, will be waiting for unequivocal final statements. and most importantly, actions aimed at de-escalating the conflict during the holidays. The regime's unwillingness to directly respond to Russia's proposal clearly shows that the ideological basis of today's Kiev regime is neo-Nazism.
Ahead of the parade, the Kremlin is deploying all air defenses to Red Square.
I think everything will be concentrated on Red Square. We currently have good capabilities for producing long-range weapons. So if desired, we can plan such an operation.
These are Chinese military personnel in the center of Moscow. They are also preparing for May 9th, wanting to march in Putin's parade. St. George ribbons, pilot caps, and Russian songs. Children from Mali are preparing for May 9th. Meanwhile, in a kindergarten in Dagestan, children were dressed in military uniforms and, for some reason, seated not in Ladas but in German Mercedes cars.
Hooray! 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 Hooray!
A similar story is happening on the streets of Voronezh.
Independent suspensions, up carriages, automatics, engines with the power of 1 pavilion force.
In Sevastopol, victory trolleybuses have started running. They feature St. George ribbons and the sculpture The Motherland Calls. In the cities of Kazakhstan, they were not allowed to hold a parade on May 9th, similar to Russia's Immortal Regiment.
On the 80th anniversary of victory, we support the Immortal Regiment March through the streets of Almaty and Kazakhstan.
Well, this is the height of cynicism. The destroyed Ukrainian Bakhmut is adorned with billboards for May 9th. In a word, victory frenzy. In Russia, May 9th has long lost its humanistic meaning. Over the last quarter century, it has transformed from a day of remembrance into a tool, of Putin's state propaganda.
Putin is the president of peace.
Hooray!
Hooray! Hell for the occupiers! The Ukrainian self-propelled artillery Bodana obliterates enemy positions. With each shot, Russian depots, equipment, and soldiers are hit. It's hot near Kupiansk and Toretsk. The Ukrainian Armed Forces strike accurately and painfully. And behind enemy lines, there's a real mess. Ukrainian drones hit Russian military bases mercilessly. The Kremlin is in shock. The losses are counted in hundreds every day. All the details are coming up.
The domestic Bodana installation is currently stopping an infantry assault in Toretsk, and we need more of such weapons. Partners may be here today and gone tomorrow, these guys say. We can stand firm if we have our own, and it's hard to disagree with them. Fire! Fire! The Bodana gun is convincing proof that the mass production of complex combat systems in Ukraine is possible. I got used to this remarkable gun. We already know absolutely everything about it. At the time of the invasion, there was only one prototype of the domestic 155 mm caliber installation. Fire! And last year, Ukraine produced 154 guns for the military, and now it manufactures more than 20 Bodana guns per month. As of now, this is the highest rate of artillery production in Europe. We need to produce both ammunition and weapons. As practice shows, partners may be here today and gone tomorrow, and we won't have anything to shoot with. Although the Bodana is not as automated as its Western counterparts, here near Toretsk, the gun has proven to be a very accurate and long-range weapon. Fire when ready. Fire! It's a tough direction. 20, 30, 40 shells per day are used. The Russians are just gaining momentum. It's summer now, and for them, everything is just beginning. The defense of Toretsk is the longest battle of the entire war with Russia, over 10 months longer than Bakhmut. The 100th Brigade and other units currently hold about 1/5 of the city. There is no front line here. Ukrainian positions can be deep in the enemy's rear and vice versa. In Toretsk itself, the enemy has lost more than 15,000 soldiers. Thousands of bodies lie among the ruins of the city because no one retrieves them.
There are constantly many of them, too many. It feels like they never end and never will. But to say that they have had any significant success, no, they haven't. There is partial success, but I'll say this. If we lose a position, At a certain time of day, that position is destroyed, along with whatever entered it.
The Russians do not spare their own. If they notice the Ukrainian armed forces taking prisoners, they try to eliminate them. Ukrainian artillery and drones cut off all the occupiers' roads. But the Russians do the same. Most of the defeats occur when entering and exiting Toretsk. The Toretsk direction remains one of the most intense. Without Toretsk, the occupiers cannot encircle Kostiantynivka, the main logistics center of the Ukrainian defense.
Fire!
Therefore, there is a lot of work here for Ukrainian artillerymen. The commander of the American Paladin unit of the 100th Brigade is convinced that even in the era of drones, artillery has not lost its relevance, especially in Toretsk. Is artillery still relevant?
Yes. It remains relevant because it covers the infantry. Artillery is artillery. You can't do without it either. You can't quickly block or suppress an assault without it. That is, FPVs strike more precisely while we can deliver a massive strike, completely covering a certain area.
The Russian occupiers cannot hide, and the Ukrainian defense forces are destroying the enemy. Ukrainian Armed Forces sappers struck a ground shelter where the enemy was hiding using the Vampire UAV. And here, on the Kharkiv front, Ukrainian fighters used a UAV to destroy a platoon of occupiers and enemy equipment. This means that the families of Russian occupiers who went to war against Ukraine continue to receive coffins. This time the unpleasant package came from the Kyrgyzstan region. To justify the losses and supposedly show their strength, the occupiers have intensified shelling of populated areas. First, they drop aerial bombs, and then they cover the same area with artillery.
The Russians are attacking exclusively civilian infrastructure in the controlled territories of the Kyrgyzstan region. Primarily, this involves striking energy infrastructure facilities. That is, they are trying to create chaos, panic, and distrust towards the actions of central and local authorities. It should be noted that the Russian side's ability to conduct large-scale landing operations in this area has been reduced to almost zero.
And the Russian occupation army does not cease its attempts to capture Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. However, despite all the efforts that the Russians have made over the past few months, their attempts are in vain. The invaders have not been able to approach the city.
At the moment, Ukrainian defense forces have pushed the occupiers back 2 to 2.5 kilometers from Pokrovsk to their previously held positions. Moreover, there is a prospect of restoring the location of Ukrainian defense forces in the Medzhov area. In addition, on the second flank, in the area of the settlement of Shevchenko, Ukrainian defense forces are preventing the enemy from expanding their zone of presence.
And while the Russians are making new plans, the Ukrainian armed forces are taking action. The Ukrainian army is already deploying the latest robots on the front, writes The Telegraph. One of the representatives of combat technology is the Snake robot. In 2025, Ukraine plans to deploy up to 15,000 similar platforms.
This is a ground robot designed for mine clearance. It should be noted that, according to Ukrainian specialists, the technical characteristics of this robot allow it to clear up to 2 hectares of mined terrain. It moves close to the ground, neutralizes mines, and is remotely operated by an operator from a protected shelter. This minimizes the possibility of direct impact on the operator of this ground robot.
Ukraine is focused on creating robots on a large scale to assist the armed forces on the front line. An example of this is a separate unit of the Unmanned Systems Force.
The Ukrainian side is scaling up the direct use of combat drones in real combat conditions. In addition, the Ukrainian side is taking an innovative approach to the development of unmanned aerial vehicles. This refers to FPV drones, which are designed specifically to neutralize Russian reconnaissance drones and accordingly Geran-2 strike drones.
But in Russia, it was once again very loud and bright. Oh.
It's already scary. Wow.
This is one of the largest ammunition depots burning, the 51st Grau Arsenal. According to some reports, this depot can store about 270,000 tons of ammunition, artillery shells, rockets for MLRs, components for SAM systems, tactical missiles like Tochka-U.
The distance from the line of combat contact to the 51st Grau Arsenal itself is about 530 to 550 kilometers. Notably, the distance from the arsenal itself to the capital of the occupying country is about 60 kilometers. It should be noted that this area is the most saturated with air defense and missile defense systems.
This is already the 4th Grau Arsenal destroyed since the year 24. In total, there are 11 such facilities in Russia.
These are colossal losses for the Russian side. It should be noted that according to estimates by the Ukrainian intelligence community, after the destruction of 3 Grau depots in the year 2024, the intensity of fire damage by the Russian Federation decreased significantly. If previously there were up to 40,000 shells per day, then after the destruction of the Grau depots, this figure decreased to approximately 16 to 17,000.
It would be better for the Russians to strengthen their leaky air defense, as the number of depots is becoming fewer and fewer. And who knows, maybe the 5th one is already in the crosshairs.
That's all for now. For more fiery news from the front, watch the next episode.